okay? What's that?
That's much better.
How's that? Is that a little better?
Yeah. Let me just go live on
Good.
the wonderful YouTube channel, and then we're in business.
Yes, excellent.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz, welcome to the program. It's a great honor to welcome Dr. Steve Turley to the show from Turley Talks. Steve has an incredible YouTube channel where he courageously sallies forth and talks about nationalism, populism, conservatism, and a movement that is growing all over the world. Steve, you know, the thing I admire about you and what's awesome is that you've taken this channel and your Turley Talks and you've turned it into a going concern. I mean, actually have been able to leave your job as a professor and do this full time. To me, that is awesome. That is unbelievable. How'd you do it?
Oh, thank you, Charles. Yeah, right. 6 steps or less, right?
Yeah, right.
No, it's wonderful. Well, I mean, I owe so much of it to you and to our audience, you know. So, I mean, it was, you know, it was a slow going process. I didn't really start till 2016, November 1st, 2016. So, you know, we're 4.5 years or so of teaching and posting, you know, teaching and broadcasting. And it just turned out over the last year or so, the exploded and we looked at fundamentals. I had several YouTube experts take a look at it and they thought it was pretty solid. And so we decided, all right, let's go for it. And we were able to also build up enough of the business outside of YouTube, so we weren't completely dependent on YouTube. YouTube seems to have calmed down a little bit, and you know, all of its crackdowns and deplatforming and the like. So it looked like it was time to do it. You know, the old saying, "Make hay while it's sunny." So I figured, all right, let's get ready for these 2022 midterms and 2024 full time. And it's been joy. I've been retired now for about 2 weeks, and I'm very excited.
And I also think, you know, in this sense, you remind me of Rush Limbaugh a bit in that you know how to go right to the edge of the envelope in terms of discussing taboo without crossing over to the point where you're going to get censored. And that, I mean, Rush was able to bring millions of people in this country and all over the world to conservative, especially younger people, are really the heir to that in a lot of ways.
Oh my, boy, I got to bring my wife into this interview. She's got to hear Charles. Okay. Oh, thank you. That's very sweet of you. That's sweet of you. I am not worthy. Rush, I was big in my life. He helped to turn me around in college. You know, sure. I went to a music conservatory, would practice the guitar late into the evening, and I would watch 3 channels, you know, with my coat hanger antenna connected to this black and white TV, and every night, like at 1 or so, he would come on. And at first I thought, I was leftist in college, and I thought, who is this arrogant guy? I was really me, and I just I was too lazy to change the channel, thank God.
Right.
And just over a couple months he converted me. His arguments were so solid. I always constantly contrast. You never stay by contrasting Reagan and Clinton, the Reagan years versus the Clinton years. He got me, and I've been hooked ever since.
No, that's very compelling, and I noticed a good job of just that. You contrast and compare the ideologies and the actions of the international left, which you accurately call the mass, and the rest of us lumpen proletarians. Now, I want to talk about an issue that we have to, again, skirt a little carefully because this is YouTube, and that is the fact that, according to my sources, the Maricopa County audit is releasing findings this week, that they're finishing up with the actual hand count, where they are basically looking at every single ballot under lasers, and they put together this incredible audit system that should be emulated by every state and should be done every election as far as I'm concerned. And I've already seen
Sure.
the liberal media now acknowledging that this exists, first of all, which they didn't do up until now. And you've got the New York Times, you've got the Boston Globe, where I am. You've got probably outlets throughout the country putting it up big and saying this is, right-wing nutcase stuff and QAnon and all nonsense, which tells me that either the news is going to be bombastic or that they're going to destroy it before it happens. What do you think is going to happen?
Interesting. Yeah, I was just with Doug Mastriano, who got the Gettysburg hearings going. So we were together in Lancaster on last Thursday, and we were speaking to some patriots out there, and he just came back from Maricopa County, and he did confirm that there would be some results released, if not the full results released, in the next 2 weeks. Those were his words. He didn't allude to. He was pretty tight-lipped about it.
Good.
He does want to see. He shares exactly what you just said. He wants to see something like that happening in, say, 2 counties: a Democrat county and a Republican county in Pennsylvania, and compare the results. Compare, the integrity of the chain of custody verification and the like. And he'd say it was an astonishing, professional, very transparent audit, and a fully forensic audit, and that the results should be honored and respected by anybody who's interested in the truth of what happened. So that's as far as he was willing to go.
Oh, good. I'm glad he's being careful.
That's all I know, but I'm on it. I think that there was nothing to see. Then the media would just pretend to just move on, or they would just be periodically making fun of it, kind of a QAnon sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas even Vice, which is a very left-wing site, even Vice came out and said it does look increasingly likely that this called unconventional audit. Maybe it's unconventional in that it's actually being. This unconventional audit will show that Trump won Arizona. So you're seeing some left-wing outlets actually. Now, what do we do? If that, what do we right on the left do? So it's thinking through those scenarios right now. So it is a definite threat to them, no question.
And I think we should also note that elected officials from state legislatures, and I think it's almost a dozen states now, have traveled to Maricopa County to observe it. They're thinking of doing the same thing in their states. New Hampshire, like it's going to be moving in that direction, and that it could really take on a genuine populist element in that the American people, according to most polls, I think almost half of Republicans believe that there were problems, let's just put it that way, in the election, and about 30% of Democrats, growing numbers of independents. And given that fact, you would think that, at least on the surface, slightly sardonic here, that the Biden administration and the Democratic Party and the liberal media that support them, they would legitimacy. After all, I mean, if they won the election, right? I mean, you would want them to now. Here it is. Here's the. You would, wouldn't you? Instead of hiring hundreds of lawyers to try to stop it.
But of course, then, yeah, and to trying to stop it. And to the credit of the judges out in Arizona, they stayed firm. So, their media wing, the mainstream Marxist media, as I like to refer to them, the left-wing activists disguised.
The Mockingbird media.
So that's where their credibility comes from the mocking. Exactly, the Mockingbird media, I love it. Yeah, the mocking, jeering media that laughs and scoffs at all things Neanderthal and deplorable. So, that's where these are the same people that for 3.5 years told us that Vladimir Putin stole the 2016 election from them.
That's right.
3.5 years, tens of millions of dollars, and these exact same people are turning around and saying there's nothing to see here. This was the most immaculate election in the history of humanity. I mean, this is clear weaponization. That's just a term that's used particularly in relation to what's known as legalism. And it's just using any issue as a political weapon to silence your political opponents, intimidate everybody else, to further your own political positioning. That's just what we're seeing here, which is interesting because then things are not. Democrats don't hate things because they're racist or sexist. Democrats, and therefore they become racist or sexist, right? That's the key. Race and gender and so forth are being used as political weapons. So if the Democrats really despise something like vaccine passports, for example, they would be the most racist things on the planet, right? They would be the most discriminatory, systemically oppressive practices on the. But because they love them, it's perfectly fine. So, and it's the same with elections, same with audits.
Right. Well, it's entirely situational.
There's no logic.
No, it's situational as opposed to fundamental. I mean, they don't actually believe that these issues. It's all how it fits in terms of their quest for power. Now, it was 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe, that my Senator Elizabeth Warren got up in the U.S. Senate and warned the country about electronic voting, saying that these voting machines had modems and that they could be manipulated online, that the Russians could, that they could be, our elections could be manipulated by a foreign power. Amy Klobuchar said the same thing. Apparently, I now ABC News Lester Holt, of all people, talk about establishment media. He's the same guy who spoke at an award ceremony saying that objective media has no place. He did talking about electronic voting, and he interviewed several statisticians and data experts on the video. You can see it online. I don't know if they've taken it down, but I just saw it, where they said, these voting machines are rife for potential fraud. You had the Carter Library have a Blue Ribbon Commission in the 90s, headed by Carter himself and by former Secretary of State James Baker, conclude after a 3-year study that, for example, mail-in voting was too rife with fraud to go there. I wonder if we're going to hear from them now. Now if you talk about or criticize electronic voting, I mean, I'm afraid the station could be taken down. And again, I'm not saying one way or the other here. I'm quoting from Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Lester Holt, and Jimmy Carter. That's all. What say you?
Yeah, and Lou Dobbs. You could throw Lou Dobbs in a Democratic primary in Chicago. Yeah, about 10 years ago or so. They're having similar concerns. So again, it goes back to weaponization, and it goes back to the notion that nothing is objective, but there's no more common ground. We have to remember that Democratic Republican societies, they're held together by what's called the communication model of governance, and that's this notion that I may be different races, we may be different ethnicities, we may be different religions, different backgrounds, classes, whatever, but through the gift of common grace, as we say, through reason, we can arrive at common understandings of our problems and a consensus as to what to do about it. Known as the communication model of governance. What we're seeing here develop, particularly in the Democratic Party, is this radical perspectivalism. I know it's a mouthful, but radical perspectivalism is simply, it's my way or the highway. There is no option. There is no alternative. And so that's why you see it so connected with cancel culture and just these social justice warrior woke trigger moments where they just absolutely out because they can't even fathom rationally an alternative to what they're putting forward. And there is some logic to that. I mean, if for example, political philosopher pointed out for most of the 20th century, that if you're pushing something called human rights, technically speaking, right, human rights, they would say, well, what's the alternative to that?
Right.
Human rights are increasingly becoming just liberal rights. But if you package your liberal rights as human rights, isn't the alternative like anti-human, or non-human?
That's classic propaganda. It's like humanism.
It's exact.
As opposed to what, anti-humanism? I mean, everyone is a humanist.
Exactly. It's a totalizing perspective.
Sure.
If you're all for Black Lives Matter, what's the possible antithesis to that?
Right.
Black lives don't matter.
Well, it's even like the term progressive. Right.
Right.
I mean, as opposed to what? Regressive? I mean, what do they mean by progressive?
Exactly.
They have to define how they define progress. I mean, it's really, these are communist-oriented agitprop terms. They'll put a label onto something. We're the motherhood and party. You object?
Yeah.
This is just now. You've covered very well recently the phenomena of the peasants revolting, to use a term from Pogo Comics, of mothers storming school board meetings with regard to critical race theory. Now, critical race theory itself, again, this is one of those classic communistic things because it has in it some very important things in terms of taking a good hard look at the history of African Americans in this country. Nobody objects to that. But the problem is that it's been twisted into this leftist agitprop, this leftist agenda, and it's introducing race conflict in a classic class context. And mothers now, you ran a speech on one of YouTube's, which was just gripping. This woman got up and she just totally flattened these school boards. And now you have school boards locking the door. No one's allowed in at this point, which is completely unconstitutional. With regard to this uprising on critical race theory.
I think that CRT may in fact be the death knell. It may have been Achilles' heel of the left. We'll have to see how it plays itself out. But there are very few things that are as unpopular right now as the thoroughly woke CRT or the 1619 project that's being pushed by the New York Times. Tony Blair published a really interesting piece, the former Prime Minister of Britain, a very successful one too, a 10-year tenure, liberal. He's on, a member of the Labour Party.
Sure.
He published a very interesting piece. Progressives are in danger of going extinct. That's the title. He actually used the extinct word. And his argument came from an election in Hartlepool, which is in the Durham County, so kind of sort of northeast, if I recall, in England. And it's a blue collar county, vote Labor forever. All of a sudden, just a few weeks ago, defected and voted in mass for the Conservative. This is after their 19 bloodbath, where the Tories just decimated or left Labour in an electoral landslide they hadn't seen in 100 years. And what we're seeing, and this was Tony Blair's assessment, white working class men are leaving the left. They used to be on the left, the FDR left, right? The Labour left. Mm-hmm. They're leaving. They're leaving in droves. And as a result, the center left is kind of imploding. And then a new left is coming in, and that's the woke left, the progressive left. And we're finding they're causing even more people to leave. That was Tony Blair's assessment. Right. And he said if I guess Bill Maher would make a distinction between liberal and leftist. If classic liberals, who are on the left political aisle, if they don't stand up to these new woke progressive leftists, we're going extinct. That was his assessment. And he came out and said, I believe that defund the police is perhaps, you'll love this, it was perhaps the single most ridiculous and unpopular slogan from the left since the dictatorship of the proletariat, which comes out of Marx.
No, of course. And the sad thing is that they're trying to, they've done this in several major cities, and now you have an increase in murder rates and an increase in crime right here in New York, and it's a complete disaster. Now, Tony Blair's article, I think, could apply to this country as well, in that you really covered a special election in Texas where a district that had voted highly for Hillary Clinton and for this guy in there now, Biden, that now a Hispanic Republican basically had a landslide victory, and that the Hispanics are moving toward the Republican Party. I think same thing could probably be said for African Americans, and even my fellow Jews are moving to the Republican. What do you think is going to happen just a few months from now when you have the midterm?
Well, okay. So there's a couple of things. The last point you make in terms of American Jews would be interesting, because certainly Israel as a whole has just moved massively to the right. I mean, now Naftali Bennett, who's just replaced B.
Yeah, he's very conservative.
He's part of a new,
which I think beneficial.
What was it? 2 weeks ago, they call it the far right. Absolutely. This is they are leading Israel's future. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with American Jews in relation to that. They're going in that more conservative, the Haredi Jews and so forth in New York are thoroughly pro-Trump, very patriotic, very faith, family, and freedom oriented.
Right.
So, what we saw, it was in McAllen, Texas. McAllen, Texas is 85% Latino. They hadn't voted for a Republican since 1997. They voted for Biden by 20 points. And it was an absolute shock of a mayoral election a couple of weeks back. They brought in Javier Villalobos. I know the guitar composer Villalobos. I can remember the name. Javier Villalobos. Very strong patriot, awesome Latino Republican, and he won. And it was not an outlaw in Fort Worth. They had Arlington, all swept by the new GOP, which I'm calling the Grand Old Patriot Party. It's really the Patriot Party under Trump's leadership from backstage, as it were. So what's going to happen? We'll have to see. But the wind is at the backs of the patriot movements all across the country. You see it with patriot parents rising up, like what we're seeing in Loudoun County in Virginia. We saw in South Lake in Texas, where CRT proponents ended up losing their election by 70% of the vote. So these are all relatively blue counties. That's the fascinating thing. These are not deep red counties. These are all blue, or at least purple. So Democrats are supposed to be competitive there, and they're not. They're getting absolutely trounced in these elections. And so these are great signs. These are great bellwethers in the next several months. We're going to see a lot of the rhinos in the House primary. 9 of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump are getting primary. Liz Cheney's down. I don't see any way she's going to win. Bouchard should easily beat her. I think the last poll had him over 50% support versus her 20%, something akin to that. So this is good. And then Lisa Murkowski looks like she's going to get it too. She has a young, dynamic Republican challenger who's ready to take her out. Joe Miller tried back in 2010, and the swamp, so they do what they do best, and they got rid of him. But so hopefully this new challenger will be thoroughly vetted, and we can get rid of Lisa Murkowski as well. And Alaska will send us a really good patriot there. So it's really exciting stuff. We are seeing the transformation of the Republican Party into the Patriot Party, where more and more rhinos are getting pushed out, and the patriot, the MAGA deplorables are becoming the very identity of the party, and we're seeing them winning elections as more and more whites and more Latinos begin to defect.
Right. So, I think that this could be a historic election that could change the course of American governance for a generation, actually. I mean, maybe Tony Blair will be right. The left will go extinct. And they have people like, AOC and the Squad, which are, I mean, she's idiotic, putting that aside. I mean, really, comments, that's going to be their leadership. It's going to become like the dodo bird, if that's the case.
That's a great analogy,
Yeah.
Charles. I'm going to steal
You can use that one, yeah.
The dodo bird Democrats. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll see. I don't think we can whistle too much yet, because who knows what they have in store. I mean, they're capable of, well, let's just say improprietous activities in November of last year. I want to be careful here.
Right.
And that mechanism, that infrastructure is very much there, very much alive, and it's very well funded, and it's very, it really does represent, Steve, what you accurately identify as the ruling class, and it interlocks with the ruling class all over the world, and there's a worldwide movement against it. It's happening all over the world. It's happening in China, in Hong Kong. It's happening in France, which is almost the verge of a civil war right now. We could look at countries throughout the world. Brexit is an example. And I just think that, however the pandemic came about, which is an interesting subject we can't talk about either, the fact of the matter is that it was manipulated in such a way that benefited the ruling class. And I think that's backfiring on them.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're right. I think pandemic politics has only exacerbated the patriot backlash, and again, not just here, all over the world. I mean, as a good friend of mine who's Danish has pointed out, even the Danes were protesting. Charles, the Danes never protest.
Right.
They're the last people on the planet that are going to start, rallying together in a march, and maybe even it getting a little violent. They're getting a little overly emotional. Even the Danes have been protesting this. You see it in the Netherlands, you see it throughout France, you see it all over the place. People have had it. They don't trust their leaders anymore. And for good reasons, we're finding with Fauci's emails. And I think you're right. I just think this is part of the process of the world sort of pushing back against globalism and its permanent political class, and replacing it increasingly with patriotic leaders who are going to implement a politics of the people as it's over and against a politics of the establishment.
Absolutely. Steve, let my listeners and viewers know where they can view your excellent programming and your videos, and get more information about your excellent books and about you.
Oh, thanks, Charles. They can go to my website, turleytalks.com. It's like turkey, but with an L. Turleytalks.com. As your spelling program might change it to turleytalks1word.com, or just punch in my name, Dr. Steve Turley, in YouTube or Rumble or anything like that. You'll find us there as well.
Excellent. All right, Dr. Steve, listen, I want to thank you as always for joining me. Great pleasure. I hope to talk to you soon. And have an excellent afternoon. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely, Charles. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for all that you do.
All right, bye-bye.